I want to welcome everyone to our first MMA parent book study. We are very excited about reading together and discussing Dr. Jonathan Haidt's book, The Anxious Generation. Jacob Shellabarger, a parent here at MMA, is volunteering to give us insight into this great book. I read it about a year and a half ago. I think every parent should read it and plus some. So I'm going to hand it over to Jacob.
Thank you very much, Dean Clement. Hi, I'm Jacob Shellabarger, and I'm an MMA parent. I'm going to share my screen. You might, a couple of early housekeeping tips here. If you might turn off your video, and then you can always turn it back on later, but it may save bandwidth and everything might run a little faster for you on your end. We're going to keep folks on mute too, but feel free to use the chat, because that chat is going to be how you can communicate with me, with Dean Clement, and with Jenny, who's also there. So you're welcome to leave the video on if you happen to be one of those places with awesome internet service. So with that, let's get started. I wanted to tell you first, hi, the book is The Anxious Generation by Dr. Jonathan Haidt. It was published by Penguin Press in 2024. Dr. Haidt is the professor of ethical leadership at the NYU Stern School of Business, and he's a pretty accomplished social psychologist. There's a lot of information that he's put out there that's all going to be available, and that information is through his website, theanxiousgeneration.com, and of course the book. I've got it over my shoulder here, and it's available lots of different places, including at your local libraries. I hope everybody has had the chance to read it. If you hadn't, that's okay. We're going to spend some time going over things. So with a little bit more about the introductions here, Dean Clement is with us. Also, there's me. I'm the Audrain County prosecuting attorney here in Mexico, and I've been an MMA dad since 2023. I just happened to run into the president and some other folks at an MMA event here after I finished this book last year. And because I'm looking for answers in the criminal justice system about what's going on, I see a lot of parallels between what I do here at work, working with youth, with families, professionally in the criminal justice system. I think that there's really something special that's being done in Mexico, and there's a lot of best practices and resources that the longer I spent with the anxious generation, the more I realized that this material is very focused, it's very practical, and it's fascinating. But I also want to let you know that it's not necessarily going to be exhaustive. There is so much additional material that's available for you, both on his website for free and the research, and all of those other things are available too. We've also got several MMA staff members on with us. I can't see everybody that's in the chat, but at some point, y'all say hi. So to keep this discussion going for our MMA families, and we've got MMA families, and I thank you all for joining us tonight, but also we've got some members of the community with us as well. And so thank you for your interest as well. The discussion is going to keep going on the MMA Families Facebook group. And if you've not joined that, you should. It's a great resource for what's going on campus, what the boys are up to, what the cadets are all doing, updates, times, interactions, different ways that you can be involved. We're looking at part 2 on September 16th here on Zoom, and part 3, October 16th on Fall Family Weekend. We're going to have an on-campus event, which will be a lot of fun. So when we talk about the anxious generation, this is a part of a larger cultural conversation about how the world is changing. There's a lot of technology and social media that are out there through the devices, and these phenomena that we're finding are all things that you're going to need to know, because our cadets, our students, our kids know all these problems way better than we do. Even with me as being what some call an elder millennial, I remember a time before the internet and before cell phones, and when it was 75 cents a minute to talk on the phone, and then it was a quarter every time you sent a text. That's a reality that just I hate to sound like the old guy, but today's youth have no idea what that's actually like in a world of instantaneous communication. The challenges we have with this include that this problem is growing, that we're finding an increase in youth anxiety, an increase in depression, and an increase in social issues, all of which we're going to talk about during the course of the presentation tonight. So how is this happening? As a social scientist, Haidt begins his research by talking about a big overarching idea here is a shift from a play-based childhood to a screen-based childhood. Most of us remember from a time when we were growing up, either ourselves, our families, but we valued that time when you could just walk around the neighborhood. You'd be involved in playing with other kids in the neighborhood. You'd play in groups. We see a lot of memes and stuff on the internet that says, oh, you know, when the street lights came on, I had to come home, or I knew when mom's porch light came on that I had to come home, or mom could stand on the front porch and yell, and we'd all know we needed to go home. In neighborhoods in suburbia, that's a relatively classic, but it's somewhat outdated perception now. As parents have gotten, the family size has gotten smaller, Haidt tells us, parents are spending more times with their kids. With smaller families, we're moving toward a model of concerted cultivation. The concerted cultivation model is one that he cites and that is in the source material, but that talks about oh, Google says, you've switched to a different language. No, I haven't. Sorry, I'm a little new at this. I'm used to having real feedback with people in a courtroom, and so the computer feedback is somewhat different. I appreciate your patience. The concerted cultivation model goes back into the difference between some Eastern families and some Eastern developments where many multiple generations were living in the same house together. And then they had many children, which they could pass all their information and wisdom to. And what we find now with smaller core families and those still larger groups of extended family, all of that information from those family members gets all condensed into and kind of directed and focused directly at one or two kids, where in your typical prairie family 80 years ago, 100 years ago, there were 7 kids because they had chickens and farm equipment and all kinds of other things that needed to be done. And so that extended family would put all of their effort into all the kids together, and the kids could somewhat take care of themselves. But now the converse problem that we're having is where there's so few children, you could easily see a situation where you've got grandparents, parents, aunts and uncles, all of that focus and energy is all directed onto one child. And so that not only becomes a lot of effort for that child, but it becomes a real focal point, almost where we're picking very carefully how we raise them and how we choose them instead of allowing nature to take its course. I don't necessarily mean that as we need to run faster away from tigers or anything, but we've been looking at moving toward a fear-based childhood. And some of the things Haidt talks about here, he references the work of Barry Glassner, as well as some other folks that talk about in a world with 24/7 access to media, particularly the growth into the 80s and 90s of 24/7 availability and channels, it's easier to think that the world is more dangerous than it actually is. The paradox that he talks about later in the book, and which we will get to, is that although we are largely safer as we've ever been, as we've been in a country that crime overall is down, there's still plenty to keep me in business, mind you, but crime is down overall. Our cities, our towns are safer than they ever have been. But also educational opportunities are prized and competitive. And so when we talk a little bit about a fear-based childhood, it becomes, Haidt talks about a discussion of, do you fear that your child is not getting ahead fast enough? Which is also kind of a different spin on fear that I thought was interesting. Then there's also the concern about over supervision. As we talked about before, if there's 6 adults in the house and 1 kid, that's an awful lot of adults that are taking care of monitoring that kid all the time. And then the transition into the screen-based childhood. So there's also a concept of the idea of fragility. And fragility talks about the idea that we need setbacks to be stronger and that you find immunity through exposure to items. And as we've said before, the world is safer than ever outside the home. But inside the home, there are multiple dangers, partially because we've welcomed that world that used to be outside into our home at any time without really having control over that. And it's more difficult to exert that control than it ever has been. So society has changed. We've talked a lot about adult solidarity. It takes a village to raise a child. Negativity and paranoia don't wind up yielding confident, competent, and capable kids. When I was in college, there was a greenhouse, and in that greenhouse, there would be a discussion about when they would transplant the trees, they have to stake them when they transplant them, because the outdoor trees develop because they move with the wind. They develop the ability to spring back and forth. But the greenhouse trees, because they don't face any breeze at all, they're not as strong. That stress wood theory about the outside layers of that tree help it to develop resilience and stress to move back, resilience from stress to move back to the place it had been. Haidt talks about how we move back. We've noted that particular points talking about the differences between boys and girls, but noting that boys have the lowest level of unintentional injuries that they have in a long time. And on the surface, that sounds great. We're talking about less broken arms and less cuts and less stitches. There's still plenty of those to go around, but as far as the number goes, boys are learned and challenged by climbing trees and taking hits in football and going out and being traditional boy things. They tend to be more experiential by nature. That's something that we talk about and we'll learn a little bit more about later. The problem is growing, and Haidt's discussion starts off here by talking about youth anxiety, the increasing pressures on youth, both from text anxiety, performance anxiety, as well as overall anxiety about health and safety. The depression numbers, which we'll mention later, and then fear and loneliness. And the loneliness gap is growing as we look at kids being isolated from each other. We're all together alone, or we're all being alone together. They both happen to fit in the same way. So how is this happening? Well, who are we as parents? Many of us are millennials. Hi, Gen X folks, you're still out there, I know, and that's okay. But as millennials that were born between 1979 and 1986, Haidt talks about that we had lived in a period with and without the internet, and an internet that was not open, that was not as open as what we originally found. Today's kids have full access, and they also have social media. And social media is an outgrowth of social networking. As the film that talks about the origin of Facebook, when it first came about, it was the Facebook, which my kids laugh at me about because I say, the original thing was thefacebook.com. But the Facebook was a social network. And the film and how it was created was originally a social network based around these are people who know each other. And the original Facebook is your high school yearbook. It's really that kind of option where you can look through and say, here's who these people are, here's what things were done, here's what's going on. Social networking became social media as the technology got better and better. And as we find in social media, it encourages performative behavior. It encourages everybody has to be on all the time, and you're aware that you're on all the time, because instead of just speaking individually one to another, or just speaking to a small group of people like you might in a classroom, it is a performance, and it can be and could be the entire world watching, which is both a lot of pressure and really scary, and just a total different mindset shift. Another aspect that Haidt touches on briefly is that it's free. And if it's free, then who or what is the product? And many social media sites, social networking sites and social media sites are free because advertisers are allowed access to that data, and others who can buy access to that data buy access to the data. And so being able to look out, find those things that go together, and then being able to market that is a big shift. So The pot here is calling the kettle black, or the kettle is calling the pot black. Does anybody have any questions at this point? Do we have anything in the chat? I can't see it at the same time. Okay. Jenny, were you or Renee going to say something?
I was just say, no questions yet. Thank you to everybody for kind of introducing yourselves so we get to
Yeah.
know each other. And Jacob, yeah, doing
Okay.
great. Thank you.
Cool. Well, I'm going to keep going. One of the things that the concepts of the childhoods that we experience and that we have versus what Haidt talks about as the new modern childhood is these 4 parts, and they're the main component parts of the book, and there are multiple chapters in each part. In part 1, we're talking about mental health trends. Haidt begins by discussing the decline in mental health and well-being among teens, and that rapid switch went from play-based to screen-based, which we'll talk about, and that the main mental harms of that became anxiety, depression, and self-harm. The decline in teen mental health and well-being began, according to Haidt, and I think as supported by the data, also suggests continuous access to the internet, which Haidt traces back to the beginning of the iPhone 4 in 2010, as social networking became social media and became something you participated in. And the thing that he puts on there is, this is the front-facing camera introduced in the iPhone 4. I've got an old iPhone 4 around here somewhere, and that really is a picture of what they look like. They're pretty stout little devices. But at the time that they were introduced, Steve Jobs held one up and said, this is at least 3 devices at once. And actually, he may have said 5, but it was a flashlight. That was a big deal at the time. It was a camera. It was a broadcasting service. It was a scheduler. And the list went on and on and on, all a part of the iPhone 4. And the front-facing camera made it easier for those that used that device to share their perspective, but also allow the world to see them. That led to the rise in social media and online life, as the rise in selfies and FaceTime and synchronous communication through teledevices like what we've got right now. So as social media continued to develop, social media got very hungry for time and attention. And what draws your time and attention to the site keeps you on the site, which means the sites can track it and that they're able to keep you on the site and selling you things. The autoplay function allowed advertisers to be able to count which videos played and played and played. And if you don't turn autoplay off, it'll just continue to use data and continue to send you content. The like and the retweet are part of this, so the transition from social networking to social media, because that's a feedback loop that comes back to you. If you do something and you get a lot of likes, or if you're on Twitter, which is now X, but if you get a retweet, that's, hey, somebody else agrees with me, this is great. Add that to the push notifications, which you wind up finding on your phones, the dings, the chimes, the flashes, the attention. Then that feeds the algorithms. And of course, as any of you know that maybe have been talking about shopping for a pair of shoes, when you're on the internet, if you look for a pair of shoes on one site, it is possible that they will feed you information on that pair of shoes across the entire internet, possibly forever. Because sometimes when I look for a grill brush or something else, I'll find that grill brush will just randomly pop up on ads other places, and it's all kind of tied together through the social media marketing. Let's take a look at the statistics. And the statistics that we find here talk about, some of these are older statistics, which mean they've grown substantially. But in 2014, half of teens were spending 2 or more hours per day on social media. That's not necessarily devices in and of themselves, but the social media. And that a third of teens spent more than 7 hours on non-school technology. This led to the rise in internal disorders, where we're talking about things that are inside the mind or relating to the mind: anxiety, fear, sadness, hopelessness. The statistics that Haidt talks about in the book in this first section talk about 161% increase in teen depression since 2010, that the suicide risk for boys has nearly doubled since 2010. And according to CDC data, this is not in the book, but it's one I found with some of Haidt's additional resources, 40% of teens today are struggling with hopelessness, in that they're responding to the question of, are you hopeless every day, or are you very hopeless? They're trending more toward that direction, and that's a pretty alarming rise. And the thing I thought was interesting, the citation that Haidt had in there, about 70% of 2015 teens take their devices everywhere, which I could only imagine what that number may look like now, given the explosive growth in technology that we've seen. Additionally, here in part one, there's a discussion of the digital divide. And the digital divide, in the traditional sense, the way we look at it and think about it, was this is rich versus poor, and the haves and the have-nots, and the having good devices versus having better devices. But now what we're finding is, and Haidt discusses, that it's about restrictions and oversight. Who's got the time to do that? Versus lower protective factors. If we think about how easy it is for a single mom that works multiple jobs to come home, and she needs peace and quiet while she eats supper. And the television is one thing, but it's kind of passive. But if you hand them a phone, then they can play and engage, and the mom's right there. They can surely oversee and see that. I understand the reasons why that would be done and how you would get there. But the ability to have restrictions and oversight is a time value. And that is the greater digital divide that we find now, is the ability for parents to engage, discuss, and have oversight over what their kids are doing, and their involvement in the internet versus lower protective factors, where it's like, hey, look, if they're inside, it's safer than it is being outside. But the stats don't necessarily back that conclusion because of the dangerous nature of a lot of the content that we have on the internet today, both from what is shared. It's not necessarily have you prepared your child for what is out there, but are you allowing them essentially unfiltered access to the world into your kid's room? So that's the end of part one. Do we have any questions, guys? Okay. I guess this is just part of the deal. I'm going to ramble for a while, so feel free to put stuff in the chat and we'll go from there, but we're making good progress. The next part, which I think is really fascinating, and for someone who has not spent a ton of time in child development, I found the second section to be really strong. This is about the nature of childhood itself. And when Haidt begins to talk about and study this social development section, he's drawing on his background as a social psychologist and about his extensive look back and consideration of all the things that make humans different. And this is pretty neat, because what makes humans different from others is that we are social learners. We learn together, we work together, and we're social in community. The next point that he makes is that free play is the work of childhood, which is kind of an interesting phrase, but really it's their job as kids, and it's our jobs to help them learn, how do you work together? How do you learn together? How do you be a part of a community? How can you grow? And all that is done through experiences, and that experiences are what's key to emotional and social development, because everybody makes mistakes and we do it every day. And when kids are safe and free to experiment and be and have some of those things, some of those experiences, they can make mistakes and realize, oh, if I trip when I fall, I can get back up and I can run faster and catch everybody else. If I climb this tree, I can figure out which branches are going to hold me and which aren't based on how they feel in my hands. But from another important social engagement part, kids want to keep the fun going and they want to be a part of a group. That's why it was so much fun to play together in the neighborhood. But also, even when you have babies, toddlers, they kind of engage both in parallel play, where they're both doing things that interest each other, but they're always interested in what are other ways that they learn. Attunement, practice, and rituals is kind of a really fancy way to say these are the way that we learn how to do things in group. And so a lot of times in nursery school and preschool, in kindergarten, there's recitation, there's clapping, there's patterns, there's some dancing, there's songs with actions. And when we look around and we do these things and we see the songs with actions, head, shoulders, knees, and toes, those actions are things that we share, and it's how we learn together as a group. I made a note here because Haidt talks about how this thought about learning together to be social and being a part of a social group is now somewhat countercultural, because a large part of what society is telling us now is be you, be you, you do what feels good to you. And that may not necessarily be, and it isn't often, the same as join us. Hey, come with us. We're going to go do this thing. It's not always the same. The next portion of what Haidt talks about is about social learning, about conformism and prestige. Now, I guess I'm countercultural enough to recognize that nobody likes to be called conformist, but we like copying what's the most common. We like copying what happens the most. If everybody else is doing an action to the song, you want to do the same action to the song when you're growing and developing. But there's also the concept of prestige in that you're going to copy what's most accomplished and what's most popular. If all the other kids hop on one leg and you alternate legs, then the other kids are all hopping on alternate legs. That's because, hey, that's cool. It's popular to do it that way. That's something that we can harness and that we look at as we begin to look at the development. Now, this slide we may wind up coming back to more than once, but we're talking about real world versus virtual world communication, which I hadn't really thought of it this way, but it's really fascinating the way Haidt takes this apart. He talks about the real world versus the virtual world, and it's interesting to see the comparison between the two of these things, because when we're talking about embodied communication, that's real people that are having the communication. But in the virtual world, that's disembodied. It's avatars and words and things that it's easier for our minds to separate as not necessarily real. When we're talking about real world communication, it's synchronous, where we're able to communicate, see feedback, see eye rolls. I like those. See eye rolls and instantaneous feedback. When you're talking to someone and they get your point, you can see their eyes subtly move. You can see the way their mouth may respond to what you say. You can see how if you say a joke, they soften a little bit. But in the virtual world, that's largely asynchronous. It's done turn by turn. Even now, as we're in the virtual world, it really is kind of turn by turn. It's my turn now, and we wouldn't get very far if everyone were talking at the same time. It's also one-to-one, and we talked about the context and cues that are a part of communication themselves. But in the virtual world, it's much more like what I'm doing right now, is that it's broadcasting, it's podcasting, it's vlogging, it's tweeting or Xing. I don't know what they call it now. But anyway, Facebook Live, it's doing the Instagrams. It becomes putting those things out there, and that's just launching it out there. There's no context or cues for those, which can be both entertaining and exciting, but also doesn't leave a lot of room for subtlety, because I just know I'm going to get screenshot at some point and become a meme. I just have to accept that that's something that may wind up happening. There may not be any context to it at all. Also, you have a high bar to entry and exit and a low bar to entry and exit of the virtual world. Anytime you want to get out of the virtual world, you can just turn it off, which sometimes is easier said than done. It's very easy to stop and start, but it also doesn't cost you anything to do that. But when you're in the real world, you have to make excuses about leaving a party. You have to introduce yourself to people. And when you're in a group of people, there's a social cost to just turning around and walking the other direction. There's a social cost to that, in that beginning and leaving a social space and being a part of a group is not disposable. Those are things that carry some weight, and that's something that we can do, and that we have some skin in the game, for lack of a better word, about how that works. Haidt's next
Hey, Jacob, can I just want to make a real quick comment, because we had a couple of comments and questions in the Facebook, in the chat. And I think it's interesting when you we're talking about free play and that kids want to be part of a group. And Lisa asked the question about, how do we encourage cadets to step away from screens without making it feel like a punishment? And it's kind of ironic to me that I think that they feel like they're part of a group in that disembodied space, which then makes it hard for them to get away. And so it's a real challenge. So just wanted to, kind of throw that out there.
There's a lot to that. And I think some of that comes with what has the experience been and what has the development been. And largely the development that's been in place over the last several years, particularly with regard to COVID, after COVID, is that we're finding that people are more comfortable where they don't have to look each other in the eye and be able to have that communication. But as they move forward, it's challenging to do that. It also costs them a little bit because it's kind of awkward. It's hard enough being a teen as it is, but also when you've spent your life looking at a screen and typing back and forth, you can say something with inflection in a text, but it's not the same as being able to look across from them and carry that interaction. But also having just that risk that's there in actual face-to-face communication, and the risk that comes with being a part of a group. There's relatively little risk to being a part of a group of avatars that decide they want to go somewhere in an RPG and shoot at something, because there's always somebody else to pick up that fight, and it's not necessarily you. You can turn it off at any time. But when you're going around and shooting hoops and it's your turn to shoot hoops and you don't shoot the same as everybody else, there's a chance that that's going to feel weird if you shoot different than somebody else does. I know, because I can shoot free throws underhanded and nobody does that anymore. So how did we get here? And I appreciate the question, by the way. I'm going to try to address some of that as we go along. Haidt discusses that we got here by looking at fearfulness and overprotection, and that safetyism and smartphones have essentially gone hand in hand in building those issues together. Haidt talks about the concept of experience blockers, that we want our kids to be able to risk, but we don't want them to have too much risk. And we want them to play, but as adults, our tendency is to try to guide that play. We want to develop them and say, here are rules, and you can go this or do that. And that kind of adult direction of that play blocks some of the experiences that we're finding. There's also a common rite of passage that exists, and the common rite of passages that happen as a part of when you get to be so old, you ride a bicycle, and then you move from training wheels to a regular bicycle, and for your first day of school, and your first date, and your first kiss, and all of those things. Many of us probably remember the first time anybody ever said, I like you, face to face. But the likelihood of remembering the first time you got a text that said, I love you or I like you is probably relatively smaller. Your first email, your first text, those kind of things. Rites of passage are experiences, and we draw social attachments to them. So Haidt next talks about discover mode versus defend mode and the tension that we have in raising kids between the two of them. And that in discover mode, we're looking to find activities. Kids are naturally going to be curious. They're naturally going to be anti-fragile. If you've taught a toddler how to walk, they're going to fall down and then they pop right back up and get back to it. Or they'll run full speed and they'll fall and they'll get right back up and do it again. Because they're curious and because they're resilient. They're taking risks, they're mastering their fears, and they're developing their competency through that process. And all of those things are a part of finding opportunities to grow. But there's also defend mode. When do kids get scared? When do they go on alert? When are they defending against threats and become more anxious? They're putting up barriers when we're talking about dealing with risk and conflict and frustration, because sometimes they don't want to experience the conflict or they don't want to experience the frustration. And these are opportunities for growth, and kids have opportunities for growth when they feel secure enough to be able to explore that. So this is a little bit crowded, but I sort of made it up on my own with help from the main idea, which is a summary group in education. If the child wants an experience, and I don't have my telestrator on, so you'll just have to stick with me. The top left, if a kid wants an experience, in a culture of safetyism, the child is more likely to choose a virtual risk-free experience versus In a more play-based experience, they'll take on that challenge. They'll take the risk. There'll be the skill that comes with mastery, and there's being attuned to what happens elsewhere. In the virtual experience, there's no real social or emotional skills development, because to type, "I climbed the tree," requires no social or emotional skills development. It's very neutral. But to climb that tree in the real world, they've got to take a deep breath, take a risk, and then master the skills of being able to grab, pull, and turn all at once. These experiences lead to development, which we see on the left, and that development builds experiences where you have confidence and agency and fun by actually being involved in doing things. On the other hand, to the right, we see that if there's no social or emotional skills development, and yet things are still accomplished, the child has some underdeveloped skills. And then when they face the opportunity to climb a tree for real, it becomes, yeah, I don't think I can do that. I don't know, maybe somebody else can help me do that. Or I don't think that sounds like very much fun, because the other angles, the lower confidence, the lower levels of agency, and the fact that they haven't done it before, they just don't know that it's fun. So that's part of the nature of childhood that Haidt spends a good amount of time with. As the child moves into puberty, and as we talk about puberty, and I know everybody loves talking about puberty, brain rewiring is a substantial time of brain growth and executive functioning. Now, this is the last part of the brain to develop in teens, and therefore it's the most vulnerable during this time. Executive functioning is how we make goals, how we plan goals, we execute a plan, and we focus. So during this critical time for brain development, what does the smartphone do? The smartphone is always getting their attention with notifications. It's always anyone who wants their attention can get it by the use of technology. And that becomes a real problem when they're trying to figure out, okay, I need to make a goal, plan a goal, execute a plan. Oh, the ESPN noise went off. That means that the football game starts at 7 o'clock tonight. Or, oh, I have to set my fantasy team. It's really easy to see how each individual distraction can cascade on top of other distractions, particularly when it's text messages and social media and likes and approval. Each of those things become a way to fragment that attention. In puberty and brain rewiring, we're talking about problematic use versus addiction. And Haidt spends some kind of time talking about the language of addiction. In the criminal justice context, addiction's got a very specific meaning for me. But I like that he also talks about problematic use as being another issue. Because what if we said, hey, there's this product, your child's going to get hooked on it, and it's going to interfere with the way they function in the world. We wouldn't allow the use of that product. However, the social media companies and the social networking companies, as well as the electronic firms, they knew about it and they did it anyway. And Haidt spends a good amount of time talking about the research suggesting that they knew exactly what they were doing when they did it. We talk about experience blockers, the results of safetyism, where we talk about if in a culture of safety, in a culture that says, slow down, don't take risks, manage those risks, it becomes difficult for the child and for the teen to grow into self-governing and to have the discipline to be able to say, I can do these things. The milestones and rite of passage, the phone can push out or reduce those experiences if those experiences aren't happening in person. And also there's the thought of social attachments. If a child is online all the time, who are they listening to? And what does it say when they do? I use the ugly shirt example here because, look, if I wear an ugly shirt to work, my friend is going to tell me. But if I wear an ugly shirt and I post it on the internet, I will become a meme very shortly. No one will ever tell me about it, but everybody would. But they will take their own meanings and run with it. This is a cartoon from the New Yorker. It's been nice getting to interact with you for the past 6 years. So here's your first device. Healthy kids need free play, attunement, social learning, and agency. And each of those things, they need to have those to be able to develop the skills to be able to do more of the other. Haidt talks about this framework as kids need enough free play to be able to build relationships, control impulses, regulate their emotions, to cope with disappointment, to make decisions, to navigate risk with confidence, and to try new things without fear. If children are able to do all those things through free play, they can do all those things on the right when they become adults, because when you're out playing in a group, you need to be available and have the option to be able to be attuned to the group, to learn socially, but also to take responsibility for what you are learning and where you're going to be. And so as the 4 items on the left, the free play, attunement, social learning, and agency grow, they give that is a key part of the development in building adults who can try things without fear, who can navigate risk and be confident, make decisions, cope with disappointment, and regulate their emotions, control their impulses, and build relationships. Okay. Do you have any questions? I know that was a lot. Okay. I don't see anything. I know I'm trying to keep this going, but this book's great. The research, the freetheanxiousgeneration.com is the place where the research is. There are a couple of different handouts that Jenny has that we've put together that include further resources about this particularly rich part of the book. A last note before we leave the nature of childhood is that the culture determines attractive behavior, in that as adults living in society and being social, we want to fit and we want to belong. We want praise and respect and approval. We become those that we are the closest to. That's something that you hear sometimes is meet someone's 5 best friends and you're going to have a pretty good idea of who they are. We love groups where behaviors are normal, where you don't want to be the one guy who speaks Spanish when everybody else in the room speaks Portuguese. It becomes uncomfortable. And that moving into groups where behaviors are all normal together, and language isn't a very good example, but that's the culture determines what kind of behaviors are attractive. And if the behaviors are, hey, let's all go have this new experience together, part of that is what makes being on a dorm floor fun when you're in college. When you get a little bit older, is having that social experience of, let's go have this experience together, as opposed to everyone staying in one spot and having a more sterile experience together. So Haidt next talks about the harms of the phone-based childhood, which can get pretty depressing. I'm going to try to make this as lighthearted as possible. The average teen today is spending about 7 hours a day on screens, not at school. I'm working in front of a laptop with multiple screens here at work, and I'm on it for hours and hours and hours. But all of that comes at a cost, and that cost is the opportunity cost. For every hour you spend on the phone, what are you doing less of? And the opportunity cost discussion is a values discussion that we as people should have and need to be having with our kids about, hey, if you spend an hour playing Minecraft, what else could you have done with that hour? And whether that's doing chores or whether that's running around the yard or whether that's picking on their sister, there's plenty of different options that are there. This opportunity cost and use of time on screens and phones comes at the cost of child development. And Haidt talks about four particular problems of the phone-based childhood: the reduction in quality and quantity of sleep, the social deprivation and isolation that results, noting that the statistics show that pre-COVID, between 2012 and 2019, in this particular generation, there was a cut of half in the amount of social time they were spending with each other before we isolated and sheltered in place. The next part is about attention fragmentation, which we talked about a little bit earlier. It's hard to stay dedicated to a task, and it's hard to have an attention span when there's so many things competing for your attention all the time. In a 24/7 media environment, which we experienced telling us the world was dangerous in the 80s and 90s, now they have that with all kinds of other things saying, hey, play this game, do this thing, gamble this, look at this picture, check out what people think of you. And the fourth part is the addiction, the problematic use, where it talks about tools that are engineered to hook and keep with the use of dopamine. Teens need about 8 hours of sleep, at least 8 hours of sleep, for sleep deprivation. And teens that note high screen use have less sleep, delayed sleep, and poorer quality sleep. The research in that is pretty good. There's a lot of footnotes in this particular section. The social deprivation is a discussion of the lack of face-to-face interaction with peers. And this is one that's a little bit harder to quantify, but there can be a discussion. Haidt talks about it in terms of social junk food. It feels really good, but it doesn't satisfy. If you want to chat and you can chat with a group chat with all of your friends and you're going back and forth with them, it is very temporary. And likes and shares and the social media types become the social media type of interaction becomes very temporary. Like we talked about before, a thumbs up on the Facebook or a like on a tweet or something else is very temporary. You can push something out to the world and get a bunch of likes or tweets, but it instantly becomes a comparison between, well, I didn't get as many likes as last time, or I didn't get as many likes as this other person, or this other item. But Haidt notes that your first time that spoken, that where you look face to face to someone in the eyes and say, I like you, or I love you, that's something that's going to be remembered. It's sticky. It's something that really touches who we are as people socially. And we talked about the decline in social deprivation from 2012 to 2019, the pre-COVID era, to the acceleration of this deprivation during COVID. Next, there's attention fragmentation, which really kind of goes into three different parts, which we've talked about as well. The task dedication, the ability to make a plan, stick with the plan, execute the plan, and then attention span. Notifications and focus distractions. Every time there being something else saying, pay attention to me, pay attention to me. Oh, I should check my phone because it made a noise again. Each of those things all play into the attention span, but also kids like to have fun and entertainment. And in every single spare moment that they can fill it with, the phone will fill it with, hey, do this instead, which is just a constant variety of taps on the shoulder and sometimes prods and sometimes noises that say, do this instead of whatever you were planning because this is more fun. When we talk about addiction and problematic use, significant research discusses the role of dopamine and that dopamine has similar effects to drugs and alcohol and the social effects of those harms. We recognize and know what it's like to have those social effects, whether you're included or not included in that particular social group. We know that and we can feel that. Haidt's discussion goes into the 24/7 internet and social media, that it being different for boys, that boys are largely encouraged to withdraw from the physical world. And because there's some version of it's risky for them to be outside, it's risky to be involved in these activities, it's dangerous to be where I can't see you, or where there's not a social group that we can trust and see, then it becomes easier for boys, especially in the modern, especially with increased screen time, to become very invested in the virtual world. It's very easy to get hooked on building and being involved in a video game, building and being involved in something that they do themselves, but also take a high level of ownership. And this is me, this is something I'm doing, but not necessarily something that is built together in a cooperative version. Haidt talks about the increase with pornography and with gaming, particularly gaming as it refers to, well, not just regular games, but also gambling. In pornography, boys can indulge extremely powerful desires that they don't have the skills to process, especially if there's no one to help them process those images. If they're processing them alone, it's really easy to become desensitized. And teen sexuality can be a very powerful desire. And if they don't have the skill to process that, and the only people that are going to process it with them are people on the internet who are going to encourage them to know that pornography is not real, but there's a tremendous amount of it out there and available. But boys lack the ability to process that unless there's good concentrated discussions where they can share those thoughts somewhere that's safe, but also have an environment that largely doesn't encourage boys to talk about feelings at all. The result is that we're finding a massive increase in what is being described as meaninglessness. And the CDC study I talked about earlier talked about a 40% increase in hopelessness, which had been noted. That was a very recent CDC study. Also, there's the discussion of the spiritual. And this is one of Haidt's, spends an entire chapter talking about the discussion of spiritual, in that in real life versus social media curated environments, we're talking about things that are collective. Emil Durkheim talks about the sacred and the profane. If you'll forgive me for being a little bit out there, I'm going to go there. The collective consciousness is what we do as a community. It's the self-focused or the profane consciousness is what is there. And socially, we're encouraged to contribute in the sacred, but we're encouraged to take away and take individually in the self-focused or the profane consciousness. Kind of something to think about here that we see in the picture that's down there at the bottom. We got the one guy who doesn't have his device, and everybody else has their device. They are all taking items, but he's just kind of there being a part of it. Now there's a difference between the two of them, in that the collective or the sacred in the community encourages us, when we are in a community together, to be slow to anger and quick to forgive. Because if there's 5 or 6 or 10 of you playing together, and you're the one who gets angry and you decide to take your ball and go home, that's not very much fun. But also, when you're playing together as a group, you're synchronous. It goes back to the communication theories we talked about at the beginning and that Haidt talked about, but that everyone acting together. It encourages meditation and mindfulness, and that you need to be present and aware of your actions, controlling yourself and being disciplined, but also being aware of how what you do affects the rest of the group. And being in a community encourages you to think beyond yourself by self-transcendence, which is your role in the community overall. However, the internet encourages us to be focused, very self-focused, to talk about being quick to anger, to slow or never to forgive, because we talk about, there's a large discussion and somewhat of a discussion in Haidt's work about cancel culture. It's disembodied and asynchronous, in that when you're in a group, there's immediate feedback back and forth between you. But if it becomes a like here, a like there, a comment here, a comment there, the distractions, the alerts, they fill every moment with the device if you allow it to. And largely it's self-focused, even when it's been involved in the broadcast. It's self-presentation, it's about branding, it's about social standing, as opposed to someone's actual thoughts inside. One of the ways that Haidt suggests this can be resolved is by getting outside yourself in more than one way. He tells a story about encouraging his students to just take out their earbuds and go for a walk, and then journal and reflect on that experience. Haidt also talks about the God-shaped hole, and that awe and wonder in being outdoors in God's creation push each of us to be involved in searching for meaning and connection and elevation. And that the phone-based life is very trivial. It's very temporary. There's nothing lasting, because it will all disappear and be replaced. It can be very degrading, and it can be very content driven. It's very much, what have you done for me lately, as opposed to what can I do in society overall. Are there any questions at this point? We've got a little bit more time and a couple of points.
We've had some good questions, some related to just keeping cadets engaged, and I think Jacob, at the end of your presentation, I think Craig McMillan can address some of that,
Yes.
so that we can keep kind of flowing.
Yeah, let's keep going.
Yeah.
I do have some thoughts about the experience, and I will tie it all together at the end. I promise. Great. I'm not going to rant too much longer. Yeah. Talk about what we as parents can do is the collective action problem. The collective action problem is where, if we as a core group of parents and as a core group in a community can stand together to make a community where we can put down some basics of these are things that we all can agree and that we all can do, we can encourage our kids to come back together. We can encourage our boys to live and challenge and push each other to be better. The collective action problems and the solutions that he suggests are: 1, no smartphone before the high school; no social media before 16; phone-free schools, independence, free play, and responsibility in the real world, which are all pretty lofty goals, but I think they're being met pretty well in the education background that we've chosen. And this is just me as a parent, Dean Clement or Sergeant McMillan or anybody else may stop me at any time, but I believe that Haidt's points are addressed by MMA and were largely addressed in the education process before we got to this point. With no smartphone before high school, the cadets earn their privileges. They even earn the ability to use their phone, and they learn and grow in a safe and structured environment. One of the points Haidt talks about no smartphone before high school is if they are at a point where they can learn and grow in a safe and structured environment with trust with their parents, then gradually can be introduced to the outside world here. And no social media before they turn 16. Now, this doesn't mean no internet, but it's very difficult for teens for preteens into teens and even into older teens to feel a lot of social pressure and to be able to find ways to act that are more like what we talked about, very reactive, very quick to judge, very quick to anger, very slow to forgive, which is the opposite of the way that we usually interact in groups. And by doing so, if we stay out of that social media area, we're building leaders who are accountable and civil and respectful with the use of technology. Because the technology is so important to the future, learning how to use this, but also build and maintain the original communication tools are real important. As far as phone-free schools go, distraction-free classrooms, athletics and meals and more, and learning and earning the ability to do that. And the independence, free play, and responsibility in the real world. I look at the MMA outcomes for both mind and body and spirit, and there's a focus on personal, team, and relationship success, because every day cadets are encouraged, take command of your life and your future. And I think this is an interesting way to take a look at what Haidt challenges us to do socially, but also talks about the growing emphasis this generation places on themselves and their own self-identity as opposed to overall group identity. But take command of your life and your future is a very common refrain at the Academy. As far as other tips for parents of teens, Dr. Haidt suggests that we increase teen mobility, that we rely on them to do more things, that we find them jobs. We ask, how can they learn to nurture and how can they learn to lead? Encourage getting bigger thrills in nature. But also the cautionary point that he has here is be very careful with tracking. Just because we have the ability to track every second of every day and every movement does not necessarily mean that's going to build a lot of confidence if we do that. So that's my overview of the what parents can do portion, and I've got a little bit further to go. Okay, I'm getting the nod from Jenny, so I'm going. I look forward to hearing more here at the end. J.F. Roxburgh was the headmaster at the Stowe School, and something I've read in a supplementary material here is that his goal as the headmaster was to cultivate men who would be acceptable at a dance and invaluable in a shipwreck, which I think is really kind of awesome, because I know lots of cadets that are on campus today that would be exactly that, acceptable at a dance, invaluable at a shipwreck. We're looking for questions of character, and every school used to be about developing men and women of moral courage, of civility, and of putting other needs before their own. The earnest chasing after what character is. Colonel C.R. Stribling, a previous president of the university, was a resident of Mexico. He was in my Rotary Club. He passed away relatively recently, but he often spoke about cultivating young men who think like a scholar, who act like a gentleman, and who look like a soldier. And there are things that matter in each of these. And I remember Colonel telling me a lot about each of these things, as being very proud of Missouri Military Academies he was. In thinking like a scholar, we're encouraging critical thinking and an intellectual curiosity. We want to raise young men who are going to think about their actions, but who are also going to be curious in the world around them and have the courage to go explore and encourage that. To act like a gentleman, it means to have character, integrity, and social responsibility, and to live the core values of the academy. And to look like a soldier, we talk about pride and discipline and tradition, and that belonging, and that going way back to the beginning of the book. And when Haidt talks about dance, movement, ritual, chants, things that all go together, those are things that bind communities together. And that's one of the things that binds the Corps of Cadets together here. Structure brings order and discipline. Responsibility develops accountability, and love creates self-confidence, both for themselves and to love others. The pictures that you see here are a couple of lots of cadets. On the left is pinning ceremony 2023. When all the cadets in formation, you'll recognize the 5th cadet in with glasses is my son. As he was here with all of his new friends from around the world. And on the right, that's my grandpa, who's not dressed in MMA uniform. He is a resident of Missouri Veterans Home here in Mexico, which is right across town from campus. And cadets visit there all the time. They are able to go there, be part of community service, be part of interaction, and they enrich the lives of all of us here in the community. And they earn the privilege to be able to go out and do that. And they also have the confidence to note how happy it makes them when they are involved in the community. That builds both love for themselves, the strength of character that's there, and the responsibility to be active when they're there. The love, honor, and truth is that we all live in community. And as a part of the Mexico community, that's important to me, knowing that these cadets are a part of our community, and I welcome them just the same. What kind of a man will you become? The cadet oath: I will not lie, cheat, or steal, nor tolerate those who do. There are 6 young men in this photograph here that are saluting. They are from 4 different countries. Some are from single parents, some are from the country of Mexico, some are English as second language, some are from the city of Mexico, Missouri, like my son, who's also mentioned here. And that each young man that's represented here, two of those are in our service academies now, and my son is a junior, so he's got a little ways to go. But they've all done a lot of growing together, a lot of learning together, and respecting each other. So a few tips while I still have your attention as an MMA dad. My advice is: 1, make sure you check in with the advisors, the CLAs, and the coaches. Those are the ones that are going to spend the most amount of time with your son, and they see him every day. The advisories and the homeroom and advisory areas, the CLAs and coaches, they know what's going on, and they're more than happy to share what they know because they're enthusiastic about your son as well. Make sure you're reading as well as writing and learning more about what the cadets are up to. The cadet handbook is really thick, and new boys have to memorize and be prepared to be tested on it beginning to end. So if you get curious and you ask him questions about that, don't be surprised if his eyes get real big at the beginning, but that you will learn a lot of interesting things there. Be involved with the Parents Committee. There's the Thinking of You boxes and all the things Parents Committee does that makes life on campus really special for these cadets. Get curious about and celebrate some of the things that you see, both from Flickr or whatever you see from communications that come from Jenny's office or from school. Hey, what does this acronym mean? What does this mean? Tell me about this. There are all kinds of things that you can have the opportunity for your son to be the expert and give you a little education on that. As far as staying connected, there's the emails and there's Flickr. Both of those things, the Flickr role is just fantastic. It really allows you to get a great sense of daily life here at the Academy, the big moments, the quiet moments, studies, celebrations, everything else that's going on. When you talk to your cadet, make sure you're asking them questions in terms of, tell me about your highs and your lows and your wins, because you got to celebrate those wins, and there are always going to be a lot of them, particularly as they're earning more and more privileges as they move along. Talk about lessons learned. Lessons learned every day. Sometimes it's I have to tie my. Sometimes it's don't put a check in your shoe or it will disintegrate. That's its own story in and of itself. But also ask your cadet about what they did. building independence and accountability. What are things that they did themselves? And the question that I have as a parent is trying to come to the answer of who's your person. And in terms of your cadet, that's who's your person on campus that you feel safe with? Who's the person on campus you have the most fun with? Who's the person on campus that listens to you the best? Or as Jerry Maguire describes this, help me help you. The last thing I can say is trust the process, which many of you have heard a lot, but this is one cadet's journey. This top left is my son on new cadet resolution day with very little hair, a brand new backpack, and a shirt that doesn't have any tears in it. Underneath that is him working to earn the ability to wear his hat brass and be a part of the Corps of Cadets. A significant amount of physical challenges, going through that as a team. You'll learn more about the transition from maroon and gold phase and the crucible. At the top, that's President Geraci, the general, speaking with a lot of the students there at one of the public speaking contests here, the contest that's held in the spring. Bottom center is my son after his first goal in state playoffs this past fall. I'm proud to be an MMA soccer parent. My wife and I love the soccer team and really enjoy getting the chance to see and travel with them and be a part of their opportunities. But there were last year kids from 7 countries and 17 states represented across the soccer team. And being a part of something that wonderful, to see the way those boys came together with that coach was really wonderful. And in the top right is my son at the speaking contest. I want you all to know how proud that we are as residents of Mexico. We're Mexicoans, by the way. We're happy to tell you about how happy and proud your cadets make us. We're so happy to see them as a part of our community. We welcome you and your families to be here, and I hope that they will enjoy their time here in Mexico as well. So that just about finishes that up. This is the keep the discussion going slide. Remember, we'll be back on September 16th and October 16th. And Jenny, I think Sergeant McMillan wanted to say something.
Yes. So, so Craig McMillan is a member of our commandant's team and has recently been appointed our new activities and recreation specialist. So he was in the commandant leadership advisor role. So he's very familiar with kind of life in the barracks and some of the challenges that parents have been asking questions about. So, Craig, if you'd like to say a few things to help address.
Yeah, so I started off here at MMA as a CLA, and then last year I was a senior CLA. So I'm familiar with pretty much all these issues that you guys are struggling with. We can't eliminate any of this stuff altogether. It's just kind of a fact of life that this technology is part of our society, and we have to teach these guys as best we can to utilize that in a good, productive manner as much as possible. That's not always how it turns out, and we try to course correct when we find them misusing stuff. In the barracks, they have their computer during study hall. The CLAs are up monitoring those sessions, trying to keep your guys' boys on task, doing the things they need to do during those. In the evenings, we've tried to do many different things. The biggest of which is right. And so when they go to sleep, the CLAs will be up monitoring, right? We go by, we check on the rooms, we make sure that their lights are off, that they're going to sleep. Sometimes they try to sneak their computers under their covers and things like that. We do try to, we do pay attention to those things. We try to find them out when they're trying to bend the rules and cut corners and those things. In the past, we've tried having them put their computers out on their chairs and things when they go to sleep. But part of the stipulation for the school day is that their computer is fully charged, so that they aren't trying to charge it during the school day. And so having their computers sitting out on their chair during the night makes that part difficult. So there's some competing interests in here that make some of the solutions a little more unmanageable than others. But there are adults in your kid's life going around trying to keep them on task, trying to keep them well regulated. one of my biggest pieces of advice, I think, is to get to know your CLAs, get to know your senior CLAs. There was a lot of parents last year who requested us take computers away after study hall. Sometimes we can facilitate that. Other times, when you end up with taking away 30 computers at the end of a night or something, that quickly turns into 30 fights. And so that can turn into a little bit of a chore to do. But that's what the CLAs are there to do. And they manage that as best they can, especially with how few of them there are per barracks. So get to know your CLAs is the best piece of advice I can give you. Work with them. They have a hard chore in front of them because these guys are so addicted to their electronics. They'll figure out ways to get burner phones. So they'll turn in their regular phone, or they'll turn in a burner phone and keep the regular phones. They will do just about everything to have some sort of technology constantly. We try to stay on top of that. We catch them as much as we can. You guys helping us with that is key. There was a lot of times last year where, for whatever reason, they'll be honest with you guys about, yeah, I have a burner phone, and I don't think they expect their parents to call and tell the CLAs that, but I would get information from parents being like, yep, my kid has this, and we would go get it from them, and the kid would be very confused as to how we knew he had it. So any information you can help us with, if you think your kid is staying up late, he might be ducking his head down, he might hear something coming down the hallway, whatever it is. And so if you think that is happening, get in contact with your CLAs, and then we know what to look for. We know, when we go by his room, maybe I look for an extra little lump under the covers to see if he has his laptop with him. Any and all information you can give those CLAs helps them be successful. So reach out to them. They generally reach out pretty often. They try to keep in contact with the parents as much as they can. And that's a tall order sometimes. So just be patient with those guys. They have a lot of work that they try to do, and it's hard work. I've approached the situation where I've tried to take what I thought was a reasonable tone, and we were withdrawing cadet's use of his computer, right? And I was like, it's his first offense. I'm just gonna take it for the night. I feel, like I'm really working with them. I feel like I'm being fair, and you go take it away for the night. And the cadet has a reaction that you're not expecting. He just can't handle not being with that technology, with that computer for even, a single night. And so all of a sudden you're in this intense turmoil and struggle with this cadet over something that seems like it shouldn't be that big a deal. And so, taking that electronics away is vital, but it's also hard. So just have patience with that, and work with your CLAs. That's the best advice I can give you guys.
If I can, one thing too, some people, especially those who are outside MMA, they think, or they're not sure, but think that it's like a prison, and it's not. And so cadets do have freedom, and we do want to help them to learn. And part of that's, as Craig said, parent partnership, where the parents have to, we appreciate them talking with the CLA so that we can work all together to help them. It is very difficult to completely limit, and as Craig said, some of them have very extreme reactions, which means it's all the more important to do so. One of the things that I think is really important about the book too is that idea of collective action that's needed, and the fact that trying to do these things on your own is very difficult. But fortunately, within the academy, within the parents group, we do have a collective action of trying to help the cadets have these healthy habits, and also that we are giving them limits together, so they're not all on their own. They're not the only young man out there who has limits on social media, and so that can also help as well. But
And hopefully, I'm in a new position this year with being in charge of activities and recreation. So hopefully, I get the opportunity to give your kids lots of opportunity and things to do outside of their computers. It is a hurdle getting them to want to do things outside of those computers. But I think with the staff we have in place, and some of the things we're going to try this year, that we're going to have a really good opportunity to make that happen for them. So I'm very excited for this upcoming year, and to be able to get them away from those computers and things as much as possible.
Yeah, let me say briefly, I think that we are a part of that collective action, that we as MMA parents and as the folks that have all come together have all decided, look, we're committed to building better relationships for the folks at the school, the CLAs, the instructors, coaches, everybody else. We're committed to building this environment together, and that each of us as parents have all taken that step to work together for a common goal. And that's really encouraging, that a lot of what Haidt talks about in the answers to the collective action plans are things that we're all working on together.
Hey, all right. Want to thank everyone for the questions and the discussions. I hope that we've kind of generated some good thoughts. I think one of the things that's most fascinating to me about the book is how much that we have to learn. And the more that we educate ourselves, the better off we are for our children on helping them to be healthy digital citizens in this world as well. So look forward to what we have next coming up in part 2 and part 3. But yeah, Jacob or Dean Clement, do you have any other closing remarks?
Well, I just wanted to say thank you for everybody that's on tonight. We had a great chat going. There's a couple of you that can contact me by email, and I can get back to you and set up a call to answer some more questions or to set up some plans.
Yeah, and thanks all of you for coming out. It means a lot to have a community that's going to support this school, the parents that are all supportive of each other. We want what's best for our cadets, and I want what's best for my cadet. And I believe this was and is that opportunity, and it is, and we're working together, and that's great. And reading through this book, the enthusiasm about this book, and the level of excitement and encouragement that we all have together, I think is really positive. So I'm looking forward to continuing the discussions with you guys. Thank you for putting up with my overly enthusiastic presentation, and I'll look forward to seeing you guys again soon.
And we'll be following up with an email. Jacob's put together some great resources that you can follow up, additional podcasts and videos to watch to learn even more. So
yeah, they range from fun to extremely dry. So whatever you're in the mood for, it's there.
All right. Well, Jacob, thank you so much. This has been so helpful. Very, very much appreciate it. And if and as always, if we have more questions, please feel free to email us. I'm going to put, I know Renee has Dean Clement's put her email in the chat. I'm also going to add Craig's and mine as well. So we are here and happy to help. Thank you, everyone.
Good night. All right, let's get out of here.